because I want to key in on someone who's being mentioned in the chat, Terrel Bernard. So when we talk about this potential matchup in the middle of the field, right? So we're talking about maybe they run on early downs. Maybe there's early down success with Josh Jacobs because he's a very good back. And then Jimmy G tries to attack the middle of the field. Where do you stand on your thoughts of Terrel Bernard in coverage? Because I thought he played a pretty good game against the Jets. But again, the degree of testing there is kind of hard to say with Zach Wilson versus Jimmy G, who's, I think, an upgrade. Stokes, I'll start with you, but just what are your thoughts on Terrel Bernard in this game and his matchup against the Raiders offense?
So when I watched him on Monday, I didn't feel as if I could pinpoint a bunch of plays where he's like, well, he did the worst thing on that play to cause this to be a negative play. So I don't think that he did anything to make it seem like he's the first person to lose his spot if there were another option involved. I felt like he played well enough. He made some stops. I mean, he did sometimes the Trey Edmonds thing where he makes a tackle 11 yards down the field. Like, oh, great, thank you. I would have preferred you to get the tackle a little bit earlier, but he was enough. He played well enough to give him more time playing because he didn't get an opportunity to play in the preseason. So he's like so many of these guys as well. You know, if you don't play a lot in the preseason, there's whatever amount of rust you want to associate all that with. And I felt like I was pleasantly surprised because I was worried that without having the security of knowing how the middle linebacker position was going to look, that it would look bad. But I think with enough good guys around you, you don't look terrible, and I didn't think he looked terrible.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, David?
I liked a lot of what I saw from Terrel Bernard, particularly in coverage. He just looked like especially like you brought up, that he didn't have most of training camp. He didn't have any of the preseason to work through. He looked like he knew what he was doing. He looked like he was comfortable in coverage. He didn't look like there were any like major defensive breakdowns, so he's getting guys in position because he's the one who's calling the defensive plays. I think that for having that be his first game as a starter was really good. Maybe a couple of missed tackles in the run game or whatever, but nothing too egregious in my mind. I think that Terrel Bernard has done more than enough to, I think, earn people's trust. Certainly the coach's trust. I mean, they're the ones who put him in this position. He seems to have succeeded so far. I think Bills fans are just kind of antsy when it comes to what they want out of this position, just because it felt like the Bills didn't do anything to improve this position. They just sort of said, well, we have Terrel Bernard and we'll draft Dorian Williams, but we're not going to make Dorian Williams a Mike linebacker. We'll have Terrel Bernard be a Mike linebacker, and we'll sign Christian Kirksey, but he's not going to be available week one, all that sort of stuff. So I think there's just this sort of anxiousness and antsiness that is causing Bills fans to not feel overly comfortable. And also just, I think a lot of it also comes from the fact that Bernard is, quote unquote, undersized for the position. And I think that comes from this sort of archaic understanding of like what linebackers look like nowadays. And it probably doesn't help that, the previous Bill linebacker was Tremaine Edmonds, who's 6'4", like 245. I mean, that's a man. That's a machine of a man.
That's a man.
That's what he is. But if you look at, one of the best middle linebackers in the NFL right now is Roquan Smith. He is, if I am looking this up correctly, 6'1", 236. I mean, if you ask most people what a Mike linebacker is supposed to look like, that's probably not what they're thinking of, right? Like we just sort of have this older understanding of what a middle linebacker is or isn't supposed to look like. And it's not 2005 anymore. Not everybody is going to be Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs. Like, that's not what we're looking for here. It's a modern NFL, and it requires modern players. And not everybody has to beat blocks the same way either. Not every, he's short, he can't stack and shed. It's like, not everybody stacks and sheds. That's not the only way to do this. It's the same thing with tackling, right? We talk about, you hear it all the time in broadcasts. It's great to see a perfect form tackle, right? It's fun, it's exciting, and it's a great hit 99% of the time. But also, 95% of the time, you're not getting in position to make a perfect form tackle. It's not realistic. There are other ways of tackling. In fact, I think it was sometime last year, maybe even a little longer ago than that. Eric put out on Twitter this coaching clinic, or a clip from a coaching clinic that Mark D'Antonio did, where it just broke down like the different types of tackling that they teach when he was at Michigan State. And it's interesting because I think if you talk to other coaches, they would probably tell you the same sort of thing. It's like, you're not always going to be in position to make a perfect form tackle. So when you're in this position, this is what you should be trying to do. When you're coming from this angle, this is what you should be trying to do. And, we could talk about missed tackles as one thing, but the problem is with missed tackles is if you're missing a tackle and it's leading to a big play, it's partially on you for not making the tackle, obviously, but it's also a defensive thing as a whole because they're not in pursuit either. And so sometimes a missed tackle is okay because you have pursuit coming in right behind it to help make up for it. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have that, then it's a whole thing. So it's tackling is a team thing. And it's an individual thing. It's like anything else with football. It's an individual thing, but it's a team thing. It all comes together in the end.
Yeah. And someone made a comment, I think it was Pops earlier, I'll try to find it, but it was about here it is. Bernard's biggest weakness is what he does wearing the green dot, making sure everyone is lined up correctly. So I don't know if I agree with this. I think in principle or in practice, this makes sense. And I think you could say, as a second-year starting linebacker who has never started before because Tremaine Edmunds had this spot, he is going to go through growing pains being in this position for the first time, obviously inheriting a lot of roles that Edmunds had to leave behind. And now, calling plays, getting people lined up, making sure that everything is situated prior to snap. I don't think he did a bad job with it, but I also think when you deal with talented offenses, it doesn't matter who your linebacker is, because at some point, I can't say that. It does matter, but every linebacker is going to struggle if you're dealing with a high-flying offense that's just inherently difficult to stop, like the Kansas City Chiefs, the Philadelphia Eagles, teams that have great O-lines, teams that have great run blocking, pass blocking, teams that have great receivers. I think when it came to Bernard was in position a lot of the time. He had people in the right position a lot of the time. There were a couple of big runs, but again, David, it's multifaceted. I don't blame Bernard for Breece Hall's, 81-yard run? I blame a systemic problem where you had Trey White, who had the opportunity to make a stop and couldn't and slipped. And then Poyer took a very bad angle on the tackle, which obviously it's tough to do that, but you want to see that out of your veteran safety, be able to kind of get in position a little better for someone like Hall. And also, sometimes the team you play is just good. Sometimes the running back you face is just good. The first run of the game, Leonard Floyd, he was in position. He got chipped out of the way. And then Hall, who's being a fast, physical, slippery back, got through for a big run. Like, these types of things happen. And I think it kind of skews our perspective of running defense. And it's not to say that you don't want it buttoned up. I want it buttoned up. But I also think big runs are bad. But how the drive finishes as a result of these big runs is what matters more to me. In that game, neither of those runs led to anything more than 3 points, right? The 81-yard run, which Benford tracked down, was a field goal. Like, yeah, it sucks to put up 3, but I'd rather 3 than 7. The first big run, and yes, this has to do with Rodgers' injury, led to nothing. So I'm not mad at the way Terrel Bernard played. I'm not mad that, he's the starting middle linebacker. I think he earned it. And I also think that, David, I want to, kind of follow up the point you made too. And I know I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but Babbage talked about playing above your size. And I've said this multiple times on this show. We look at someone's measurements and we automatically assume that they're unfit for this position because Tremaine Edmunds was a freak size guy. To me, what matters is, again, playing above your size. If Terrel Bernard is getting in position in coverage, making plays on the ball, being where he needs to be pre-snap, and his assignment is carried out, I'm fine with it. And I think he could do that. And I think we should have some more faith in him.